Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Today is July 27th, 2021. I'm Steve Shields, President of the Royal Asiatic Society, Korea. On behalf of the officers and council, I welcome you to our lecture tonight. By way of reminder, lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of Royal Asiatic Society, Korea. The Royal Asiatic Society traces its beginnings to India in the late 1700s and was formally chartered in London in 1824 by King George IV. The Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland granted a charter to the Korea branch in 1900, the fourth year of the Gwangmu Emperor of Korea. RAS Korea expresses sincere thanks to our generous sponsor, Asia Development Foundation, for their continuing support. We especially thank our members who have paid their annual dues. Your dues provide essential primary funding for RAS Korea. Without your membership, we would not be able to host the lecture series and other activities. We'd love to have you join us. It only takes a few minutes to sign up. Membership gives you the opportunity to support the world's first and oldest Korean studies organization. For 121 years, we have strived to explore and promote all facets of Korea's rich heritage. Members receive our annual journal, Transactions. Members of RAS Korea are also recognized reciprocally by most of Asia's RAS affiliated societies, as well as the London-based original RAS. See our website at raskb.com for details. I will post a link in the chat box shortly. If you are not a member, we request a one-time donation. Please refer to this donation page on your screen for PayPal and bank transfer information. I will also post that in the chat box. We are joined tonight by me. I previously served the RAS as a vice president and for many years in the 2000s as a council member. I started coin collecting as a child, and that interest has expanded over the years to include banknotes. I can't tell you how many coins I have in my collection, but I only have a few hundred banknotes. I came belatedly to collecting Korean banknotes, some of which are at record high prices, which I do not own. So I'm going to try to share some perspectives on Korean history as illustrated by 100 or more years of banknotes from Joseon, the Korean Empire, the Japanese era, and the modern Republic of Korea. After the lecture, we'll have time for questions, as we always do. Let me get that information into the chat box for you. Come on here. Okay, there's information. I'll do it again later for people who might have come late. Here's my screen to share. Give me a moment here, please. From base metals to printed paper, let me invite everyone to mute your mics. There's several of you whose mics are not muted. If I'm letting somebody else lecture, I often try to do that myself, but sometimes we get some background noise. From base metals to printed paper, Coins and banknotes have been a form of exchange on the Korean peninsula since at least the reign of King Seong Jong of Koryeo. The issuance of a bronze coin called Mun Jeon, which means a no legend coin, is recorded in the Koryeo annals as having been issued in 996 CE. In the final years of Koryeo, certificates of exchange written or printed on mulberry paper, hanji, were used from 1391 until the early years of Joseon. But only a few fragmentary examples exist, attesting to the low circulation for limited purposes. Cast metal coins continued to be issued through the centuries until 1884, when precious metal modern stamped coinage was issued. Copper, silver, and gold coins were minted and used for large denomination transactions. The basic unit of the bronze coins was mun. Sometimes it's referred to as pun or nip or jan or fun. In 1423, King Seoul issued new coinage, which was set at a weight of 150 coins to 1 gun, which is about 600 grams. Even so, the Joseon Tongbo coins were technically fiat money because bronze had little intrinsic value. They were money only because the government said so. Rice was supposed to cost 1 mun per due, and due was a measure. And I haven't been able to find out just how much that was, but it was a scoop. But at the rice market, they charged 3 mun. Within 2 or 3 years, the price had risen to 9 mun. Inflation was a serious economic problem. Despite periodic coinage reforms over the next 4 centuries, inflation continued and caused not only internal problems, but regional trade difficulties as well. In 1892, the bronze coins were discontinued and replaced with the yang or nyang silver coin. It took 1,000 mun to equal 1 yang. Most of the old coins sold today in the flea markets of Korea are counterfeit. They may be 100 or more years old, but there were about 20 or 30 mints around Korea during the Joseon era. Many were private contractors, and by short casting the bronze, they could increase their profits by 1/3. Most of the public who were dependent on the coins, Yangban had no worries, they had all the gold and silver. Most of the public were unaware of the problem until caught off guard at the marketplace when a merchant refused the coins. Of course, this stoked inflation again and social distress. In less than 50 years, Korea's money went from fiat money, although some commodity money did exist in limited quantities, to commodity money, to representative money, and back to fiat money. The ubiquitous bronze mun or jun coins had value because the government said so, fiat money. Commodity money is coins of precious metal that has value despite being made a coin. Representative money is printed banknotes that can be exchanged for an equal value of precious metals. In the United States, for example, for many years after the First World War, printed paper money from the Federal Reserve was able to be exchanged for silver or gold, and meant that an equal value to the printed money of bullion was stored by the US Treasury. During the American Revolution, the Continental Congress and then the new US government issued fiat notes until the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War I fixed the price of gold at $35 US per ounce. That all changed in 1971 when US President Richard Nixon introduced economic policies that canceled all representative currency issued by the United States. Since then, fiat money is generally the norm throughout the world's currencies. Stamped metal coins, as I mentioned earlier, appeared in 1884 with the help of Japanese minting technology. The regional casting mints were closed and the government had somewhat more control over the content of the coins. In 1885, silver and gold test coins were made but not issued. In 1888, a silver HWAN coin, noted on the coin in English as HWAN, was issued. And finally, in 1892, the new currency designation of yang became the coin of the realm. The new yang was divided into 100 mun or pun, but the value was different from the old discontinued coinage. Korea's modern printed banknotes were attempted in Joseon as trade at Chemulpo, now Incheon, began to increase, requiring forms of easier exchange for unusually large transactions. The Hojo notes, or treasury notes, were to be fully exchangeable in specie at the exchange office, the Taehwan Seoul, in Incheon. Printed in 1893, the notes were never issued because the specie supply, the precious metal supply, had been co-opted by the Japanese military. If you can note at the very bottom here in the black bar, reading from right to left, it starts saying Te Chosun-gu. That was the name of the country of Korea. It was the great kingdom of Joseon. Japan protested the use of the word te in that name, but that's all another story. You can see the design influence from the 1889 Japanese yen, the circular boxes of text on the bottom and a little bit of the filigree. Those notes at Incheon were made by Japanese artists, engravers, and technology. In the years that followed this aborted effort, Japan's Daiichi Ginko, the JLNhang in Korean, in English it would be the first bank, they began issuing their own yen-denominated currency in Korea without authorization from either the Japanese government or the Korean imperial government. In 1910, the old Bank of Korea was set up. It was just called the Bank of Korea, but we say old to distinguish it from the modern one. It was the result of a joint Korean-Japanese agreement to replace the Daiichi Ginko notes, even though the first Bank of Korea notes were not issued until December 1910, which was a few months after the annexation. Note the Korean imperial seal here, if you can see it at the top center. The ihwa, the plum blossom. This is a different ihwa than the university, the women's university name. The Chinese character for E for this plum blossom is the family name of the Cheonju Ishi, the Cheonju E family, whereas the E in the Ihwa Women's University is pear. So in Korean, they're pronounced exactly the same, but there is a difference. But I find it interesting that these old Bank of Korea notes maintained the Korean imperial seal even after the annexation had taken place. Chinese characters on Korean currency get a bit confused. The basic root character for won or yen, or in Chinese, yuan, has two variants. One is a bit simpler, the other has a few added brush strokes. On Korean banknotes over the years, they've been used interchangeably, sometimes being pronounced hwan, sometimes being pronounced won. But the two terms really mean the same thing. And if you go to places like Hong Kong or Taiwan today, they call in English their currency dollar, but the Chinese character is the same as used for won or huan in its basic form. Since the beginning of the Republic of Korea in
48.
The Constitution, 1948, was it? Oh dear. All the money has been fiat money. Um, just whatever the government declares the name being. With the 1962 currency reform, all Chinese characters were dropped from Korea's money. The old Bank of Korea won was circulating concurrently with the Joseon yen. It took several years to withdraw the Daiichi notes, and then the new Bank of Joseon began issuing yen-denominated currency in 1914. All kinds of notes and coins with varied values were in circulation for several years. I honestly don't know how people could keep track of what was in their hand at the marketplace, but somehow they did. The old Bank of Korea won was equal to 5 yang of the previous currency. One was divided into 100 jun, as it still is today. Korean won and Japanese yen were at par, 1-to-1 in those days. When the bank's name was changed to Bank of Joseon, the Japanese pronunciation, which issued its first notes, the one that's depicted on your screen, in 1914. The 100 yen note became the most common banknote over the next few years. Note on the back, it says the note could be exchanged in gold or Nippon Ginko, Bank of Japan notes. By 1932, the Bank of Joseon notes were no longer convertible in gold or silver or Bank of Japan notes. I haven't been able to find the exact date or circumstances, but we know from world history the 1930s were a terrible time of economic upheaval, and so I suspect that had a lot to do with it. The scholarly gentleman who appeared on Japanese banknotes as well as Joseon banknotes is not a historical person. It was intended to represent stable old values and wisdom. After liberation, yen was dropped in favor of won. So that would have been 1945, even though banknotes were still circulating. They continued to issue banknotes under the Bank of Joseon, which for a time was under US military government control. And then with the proclamation of the Korean Constitution, it became the new government in Seoul took place. The Bank of Joseon name was finally changed with passage of the Bank of Korea Act by the National Assembly on June 12, 1950. Just 10 days, 12 days before the outbreak of the war. But they hadn't prepared any plates for printing. So it was about 6 weeks later in July when new Bank of Korea notes were issued, having been printed in Japan. On June 28, 1950, the Bank of Joseon printed and issued tens of thousands of these pink-colored 1001 notes. Note the date, June 28th. 3 days earlier, when the North Koreans captured Seoul, North Korean military officials occupied the Bank of Joseon, the very building that still stands in Myeongdong today. The printing presses were in the basement of the building. They cranked them up and printed the currency in an effort to undermine the economy, or what was left of the South's economy at the time. These banknotes are worth about a dime a dozen. There were so many of them printed in circulation. You can pick one up for a few hundred won, a couple of thousand won maybe, at most of the coin dealers in Seoul anyway. So the newly constituted Bank of Korea, established less than 2 weeks before the outbreak of the war, rushed to issue new currency. They were forced to turn to Japan for assistance because the only printing presses in Korea that could print engraved money were in the basement of the Bank of Korea in Seoul, under the control of the North Koreans. So these notes were printed in Tokyo and distributed in the South on 22nd July 1950. It took a few months before the South Korean government, then headquartered in the very limited area around Busan, to acquire the printing equipment, set up a printing office in Busan, and print its own notes. So these two notes continued to be printed throughout the war for the next couple of years. Counterfeiting and the North Koreans printing money at will in the Bank of Korea pretty much debilitated the economy. There was so much unauthorized currency being printed by the North Koreans, and there were even the South Korean notes were being counterfeited right and left. The Korean government conducted a currency reform on February 17th, 1953. This is a few months before the armistice. These 5 different HWAN notes had been printed in the United States by the Bureau of Printing and Engraving in Washington, D.C., well in advance of the reform date, shipped to Korea, distributed through the banking system, and then on that day, the declaration went out and people had to exchange anything they had in their pockets for these new notes. Not very clever or designed. That was a rush job, but it was just a stopgap measure to thwart the counterfeiting. Once there was a more permanent currency reform just before the ceasefire, just a few months after this one, and all of the old notes again were required to be exchanged. 100, let me think, oh, just a minute. 100 of the HWAN notes could be exchanged for 1 HWAN. And like the HWAN was divided into 100 jeon. Several denominations of notes over the next few years, carrying the likeness of the venerable Lee Seung-man president. One note, which I don't have a sample of because they're rather hard to come by, had Lee Seung-man's portrait right in the center. And it said that he really didn't like that design because when the note was folded, it put a crease down his face. And he really didn't appreciate that. The problem of Rhee's face being creased was taken care of in 1960. After Rhee was forced from office, the new 1,000 HWAN note bore the likeness of King Seong Jong. This is the first time King Seong Jong appeared on Korean currency, a decidedly elderly Seong Jong compared to the one we have on the 10,000 won note today. But since Lee Seung-man was ejected from office in 1960, no living leader in Korea has been pictured on the currency. Oh dear. Oh, here we are. The twists and turns of history being what they are, the new leader of Korea, Park Chung-hee, who was not yet president in name, and his ministers declared a currency reform to take place on June 10th, 1962. The new banknotes had already been designed and they had already been printed by Thomas de la Rue Banknote Company in England, shipped to Korea, distributed throughout all the banks of the South, ready to be issued on the morning of June 10th, 62. This Baek HWAN, 100 HWAN note was issued on May 16th, 1962. Even though they knew the currency reform was coming, they still kept up the pretense This note was withdrawn from circulation 3 weeks later with the currency reform. The undistributed banknotes were destroyed. There's only a few hundred of these available now, and a really poor quality one, if you can find one, can fetch upwards of 2 million won, or about 2,000 US dollars. So on the morning of June 10th, 1962, the surprise announcement of the currency reform caught everybody off guard. Bank deposit records were automatically adjusted by the bank staffs. People with cash in hand queued at the banks. I've seen photos of these long queues of people waiting to exchange their now unusable currency for the new currency. And in 62, the new currency, of course, was named HWAN again, still divisible by 100 jun, and Chinese characters, except for the official seal of the governor of the Bank of Korea, Chinese characters have been dropped. Banknotes in quantities of 1 won, 5 won, 100 won. In the fall of 62, locally printed banknotes began to be available. And we see some of these examples here. I remember the Shipjun and the Oshipjun notes. They were still kind of floating around a little bit when I first came to Korea. King Seong Jong appeared again in 1965 on the 101 note, and I had quite a few of those pass through my hands when I was here in 75. They were in circulation for about 12 years from 65 onward. This new 501 note appeared in 1966 with a depiction of Yi Sun-shin's turtle ships on the back. And I think that's Southgate. Don't quote me on that. I'm not positive. A new 51 note was issued in 1969 featuring Topgol Park, the Pagoda Park, which featured in the March 1st independence movement of 1919. As the economy grew and prices rose, there was need for a 10,001 note. And this was the first 10,001 note that was designed and printed in 1972. There was only one note printed, front and back, just one. It was presented with all due ceremony to Chung Hwa-dae and President Park's approval, and he signed it. His signature's on the left, and the date across the right from his surname, Park, 1972, April 4th. That was the day he approved the design of that note. Public opinion, the outcry from the Christian community was so loud that Park relented. I don't know that Park Chung-hee relented too many times in his rule of Korea, but he did this one time. So he gave orders that the notes had to be redesigned, and it took almost a year before the Monwon, the 10,001 note, was issued in 1973. When you look at this note, everything is exactly the same as the Buddha note, except for the portrait of King Seong Jong. They only redesigned that part of it. And so for a number of years from 1973 on, this was our 10,001 note. These are notes issued between 69 and 73. We had a 5,001 note that made its appearance. Then we had some new designs that began appearing between 73 to 79. The new 501 note with Yi Sun-shin on the front came out. A new 1001 note came out, slight redesign of the 5001 note. And the 10,001 note was significantly redesigned with a much younger looking King Seong Jong. There's also another element of the 1979 10,001 note. here behind the printing of the Bank of Korea and Mun Jeon is a dragon. It's a four-toed red and green dragon. And it's said that President Park felt that the auspiciousness of the dragon's image on the new note would help the Korean economy take flight. Redesigned notes in between 83 and 94, we still have a dragon here, but it's no longer the red-green dragon. It's now a blue five-toed dragon. It's very difficult to see in these images. The Korean government has some real strong restrictions on how much detail you can scan and have a note depicted. So I've tried to be very careful of that. With the currency redesigns of 2006 and 7, we get the current notes that we still have in circulation today. The dragon has disappeared from the 10,001 note. I suppose that might be because the economy became overheated and they just didn't need any more help from the dragon. I don't know. Here's a note that you may not be aware of. The 2001 note was issued for the 2018 Winter Olympics at Pyeongchang. It's the first ever commemorative banknote issued by the Bank of Korea. Over the decades, they've issued various commemorative coins, but this 2001 banknote is legal tender, except I don't know too many shopkeepers that would recognize it as money. They wouldn't know it, and the fool trying to spend it would really be caught short. Since they only printed a limited number, these puppies are worth about 50,000 won or $50 these days as collector's items. So from the 1880s until now, Korean money has transformed from mun to yang to won to yen to won to HWAN and back to won again, all at different exchange rates. Quite a journey. I'll let others deal with the economic history of the past 150 years because it's tied to all the currency reforms and the reasons why a lot of that was done because of exchange rates and inflation. Finally, I'd like to show you the cover of the standard Korean coin and banknote catalog that all dealers and collectors are using here in Korea. It's only in Korean. It's in mixed script. There's tons of Chinese characters in it. It's revised annually and can be bought almost anywhere. I prefer to go to my longtime coin dealer in the Hwaehyun Jiha Sangha, the underground market in front of the downtown Shinsegae department store. My coin dealer is almost 80 years old this year, and he's had his shop in the very same location from the day that the Sangha opened back in the mid-1970s. He was 38 years old when he set up his shop, and now he's almost 80, and he's spent the last 42 years making a living dealing in banknotes and coins and those kinds of things. I want to thank you for your attention tonight, and I especially want to give appreciation to Tae-hwan Kim for helping me with the scanning of my banknote collection, and also to John Dunbar, who is one of our RAS council members, for his help in putting together my PowerPoint. I don't know if I can answer your questions, but I'll give it a whirl. So if you'd like to hit the, what do I need to do? I need to stop my share and get the bigger screen open. You want to hit the raise hand function, or somehow or another wave at me. I'll try and note that you're trying to get through to me. Yeah, Cameron Pike, please.
Thanks very much, Steve. I really enjoyed that and learned a lot. I just wondered, when you look at the various twists and turns of the iconography on the notes from the imperial period right the way through, and the brief depiction of contemporary figures, is there anything that strikes you as sort of distinctive about these Korean notes compared, say, to other countries? I mean, I'm thinking in the UK, I think the Queen first appeared on a note in 1960, although there were notes, I think, in the First World War with George V on, but it strikes me as a very interesting journey. And I just wondered, for you as a long-standing collector, what strikes you as distinctive about the Korean path?
Well, what Lee Seung-man was doing was not unusual. It was fairly commonplace in that era, in Asia particularly, for the current leader's picture or depiction to be on the banknotes. Modern countries now, I don't know, there may be some that still do, well, yeah, some like Eswatini in Africa, they still have their king's face on the currency. But in the day of Lee Seung-man, all the different leaders in Asia had their face on the currency, Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan, etc. Japan has never, to my knowledge, put any living person on any of their currency. The emperor has never been depicted on the currency. Were Japan to have a president, they may feel differently, but I know the image of the emperor is considered sacred. So they've never done that. It's always been political figures, usually deceased figures. I can't recall when, for example, the United States made a law that living people couldn't be on any coins or banknotes until after so many years beyond their death. The banknotes, there's kind of there's this genre of banknotes in the Western world, and Korean banknotes, Japanese banknotes, Chinese banknotes, all kind of followed the similar sorts of design patterns that were fairly common in Europe and the United States contemporaneously. I think once the Korean engraving technology got to the point that it's at now, we here in Korea have some of the most spectacularly designed banknotes of almost any country. I mean, there's just some wonderful artwork that's there. There are some people saying we need to redesign some of them because the artist who did this was a Japanese trained whatever. And so we may see some new designs coming out. But the Bank of Korea's printing and engraving factory in Daejeon is now competing with Thomas de la Rue for banknote printing of other countries. Thomas de la Rue is a longtime English company that's printed banknotes for dozens and dozens of other countries around the world. And as far as I know, they're still in business doing that same kind of work. But the Korean Bank of Korea printing and engraving office is competing with them, and they're doing wholesale business in printing banknotes for other countries these days, using some of the very best anti-counterfeiting technologies that exist, engravers who are at the top of their field in the quality of the work they can do. So that's, I'm kind of rambling, I think, Cameron. I'm not sure I really directly answered your question, but in a roundabout way, maybe.
No, thank you very much, and I agree. I think some of them are stunningly beautiful works of art, aren't they, in their own right? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, Sam.
Thank you for your presentation. In Myeongdong, at the site of the former Bank of Korea, yep. Isn't there a museum there?
Yes, the Bank of Korea, the old building, is now yes. a museum. It's a monument.
And can you see some of these notes that you've talked about there?
That's where you can see that Buddha 10,001 note. Okay. It's on display on the first floor, left of the central aisle, as you go in from the end.
Can you just walk in there, or do you have to have an appointment?
Technically, these days with our lockdown, they like appointments, but usually there's not enough people in there to bother. They'll let you in.
Okay.
You just have to do your QR code and whatever, right. And temperature check. But
I've always been curious to do that, and after your presentation tonight, even more so. So
it is the first floor is where the main exhibits are. They have some exhibits on the second floor that appeal more to school children. They've got a whole collection of World Bank notes. Mm-hmm. It's all very interesting. Depends mm-hmm. on how much time you want to spend.
Sure.
But the building itself, they've retained the interior as it was built I think it was in the 20s. Mm-hmm. Glorious architecture, mm-hmm. marble floors and marble columns.
I love that building. Yeah.
Crystal chandeliers. It's mm-hmm. just spectacularly beautiful. And the museum exhibits, the way they've got that set up is very nicely, it's well worth a trip down to Myeongdong and an hour or two tooling around through that museum. My scanner, Kim Tae-hwan, is here. Tae-hwan, can you wave your hand at people? He's a young 6th grade helper. He and I have been down to that museum a couple of times together. He's gone with me a few times to see my coin dealer. And he's become the master of using my portable scanning equipment. You know, it takes a 12-year-old to figure that stuff out for some of us. So,
well, thank you very much. I'll pay a visit.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, well worth it. Yep. 태환, 컴도 가야 되는 거 아니야?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tae-hwan needs to get to his Komdo class. He stayed late for Komdo so he could watch the lecture. I think you're the youngest person ever to attend a lecture, Tae-hwan.
No, Sungsu's here too.
Oh, Sungsu's here too. He's a couple of months younger than you. Okay. Glad you could join us. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, well, I don't see anybody waving at me or having questions. Coin collecting is not an investment for me. It's a hobby. It's fun. I enjoy going down and talking with the old guys in the coin shops. Yoon-sung, are you raising your hand? Cho Yoon-sung?
Yes, I am. First of all, thank you for the lecture. I had a question regarding to the design of the paper money in Korea.
Okay.
So as far as I know, there are 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, and 50,000 paper money in Korea.
Right. That's currently.
If they're having a new currency of 100,000, who do you think should be the model or the person that should be inside the paper money?
That you know, that's the question for the ages. You know, the debate over the 50,000 won note went on for years and years and years. In fact, the first part of that debate, the first discussions about a new note were for a 20,000 won note. And that went on for a while. And then they said, no, let's go from 10 to 50. And then who to put on it. A lot of people said, well, there ought to be a woman. It's time for a woman to be on it. And so it's kind of interesting that 2 of our 4 banknotes have a mother and son on them. Shim Saim Dong's son is on the 1,001. Did I get that right? Is it the 1,001 note?
Shim Sain-dong is currently on 50,000.
She's 50, but her son
is on
EE.
Yeah, EE.
It's 1,001 note, right?
Yeah, it's right.
Yeah. So that's kind of an unusual sort of a thing in our banknotes here. We don't find that too often. But on a 100,001 note, my goodness, I think we should bring back Lee Soon-shin.
I agree.
On the 100,001 note, I think that would be a good. Or we put him on the 10,000 and move Sejong to the 100. I don't know. But I think Lee Soon-shin ought to be memorialized again on our, even though he's on the 101 coin, I think the 101 coin is fast becoming inviolable now. It's not, I mean, when was the last time you used a handful of coins to buy something? We just don't do it anymore. So I think I'd vote for Lee Soon-shin. Or maybe Sundong Yo-wang from Shilla. But we don't know what she really looked like. It's all conjecture. But you know, she'd be a good candidate too, maybe. Yeah. Good question. Thanks, Yoon-sung. Yeah.
Thank you.
I might point out to the rest of you that Cho Yoon-sung, who we just chatted with, was president of the Dongducheon Foreign Language High School branch of RAS last year when he was a senior in high school. We have one branch at Dongducheon Foreign Language High School that's 3 years old now.
That's great.
And Yoon-sung is in just a few days actually heading on an airplane to go to the United States to go to university. So he and his team last year provided a an encyclopedia of Korean cultural terms that's available on our website in our book section. The team of 4 young men did research, and they figured out what the 60 most common terms were that foreigners ought to be aware of, got an English definition of it, wrote an essay about the cultural significance of that term, found artwork or photographs to illustrate that. They did a really fine job. So we're really proud of our connection with Dongducheon Foreign Language High School. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago, meeting with the current students, along with John Dunbar and Matt Van Valkenburg. And we had a wonderful afternoon, giving some short lectures and then doing lots of Q&A with the high school students there. Got a chance to meet the principal and the head English teacher. It was just a wonderful day. We really are delighted with our association with those young people. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Han Sang-ju, please.
Actually, this is my husband's
Oh,
computer, so
oh,
this is his name, but I have a comment
Okay.
for, my name is Lee Song-mi, and I'm the permanent member, and I gave
okay.
a lot of lectures at RAS evening lectures.
Oh, yes, great. Nice to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Yes, I've been watching most of the
Okay,
presentations.
wonderful.
And
Yeah.
you showed us one of the banknote on the back of which there was the picture of Lee Sun-shin's Kobook-san.
Yes, mhm.
So I heard, I'm not quite sure of the detail of the story, but late Chairman Chung Ju-young was asking for help to some other country for his establishment of the shipyard.
Okay.
And the other person said, well, Korea has no history of shipbuilding. Then Chairman Chung got this banknote from his pocket, all wrinkled and crumbled, but he showed the picture of Kobook-san and told them that we had this wonderful history. So that's how he was able to get help, money, build the Hyundai heavy industry shipyard.
Oh my,
Yeah.
that's a wonderful story. Thank you.
Right. I don't know the details, but I remember that much.
For those who may not know in our audience, Chung Ju-young was the founder of the Hyundai Group Corporation. Started in fairly small construction and eventually became the leading manufacturer of automobiles and shipyards and heavy construction. And he's been gone now for a number of years, but family are still involved in running that gigantic company. So yes, yeah, Chung Ju-young, he was quite the guy. Yeah. Okay. If there are no other questions, let me bring us to a close. I feel like I'm cheating you out of time. I didn't talk for 50 minutes, but I said everything that I wanted to say, so I hope that's okay with everybody. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. A couple of announcements. The Literature Club monthly gathering on Zoom is scheduled for Thursday, August 19th at 7:30 p.m., so it's still a bit off. We would invite you to check out our walking lecture self-guided tour. I will put, oh, there's some questions in. Let me depart from the self-guided tour for a minute. There's some questions I missed in the chat box. I apologize for that. Let me just, Korea has produced currency and coins for Argentina, Peru, Israel, Bhutan, Thailand, among others. Thank you for that, Mark. I could come up with a, sorry, I arrived late. I don't think you answered this. What would be the single most valuable piece of currency at the time of issue, adjusted for inflation? Has there ever been anything bigger than the equivalent of today's 50,000 won? Oh, that's a question that I'm not sure. Boy, adjusting for inflation would be the challenge. Somebody would have to do the calculations for that. I kind of doubt it, but I'm not sure. The silver won-yang coins back in the late early Korean Empire era, those were pretty valuable coins, but I don't think it was worth, well, boy, I'm sorry. I can't answer that. I'm trying to think and calculate off the top of my head, and adjusting for inflation. There's some standard inflation calculations for some other countries' economies, but I'd have to do some research on Korean. Surely there's somebody that's done inflation calculation and has some sort of an algorithm to do that, but I just don't know about it. Okay, well, yeah, pretty hard to answer, but thank you for that question. Let me, in the chat box, I'm going to repeat the information at the very bottom of that message that I've just posted in the chat box. You can see the link for our walking tour. This is a self-guided walking tour. Download the MP3 file and the map. You can start in front of Deoksu Palace, which is just across from City Hall. And the walking tour will take you around the backside of Deoksu Palace up into Cheongdong, where the early foreigners all had settled in late Joseon era. And Matt Van Valkenburg's the voice on your tour, and he very knowledgeable about the different sites and buildings. Some of the buildings still standing from the late 1880s. Other sites are not there, but you can do a walking tour. You only have to have two people, one person or two people. We don't have to have a group. So that's what we can offer for walking tours. Our next lecture is on August 10th. And it will be by Ryan Berkebile. Due to some work schedule changes over the summer, this lecture will begin at 8:30 p.m. Korean Standard Time instead of our usual 7:30. When Ryan is not taking photos of abandoned neighborhoods, he likes to write up his explorations for his website, Long Distance Runner. He's a frequent contributor to the Gwangju News, which is an international magazine covering Gwangju and South Jeolla Province region. Ryan also self-publishes a photography zine titled The Bulldozed Future. He wanders around neighborhoods that are being torn down to be replaced by 40-story high apartment blocks and takes some of the last photos of those old neighborhoods. It's sad, interesting, all at the same time. And he will talk about that avocation and share lots of interesting photos with us in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, check out our website, check out our YouTube channel. You can find recordings of past lectures and other hopefully helpful content. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Good night.
Good night.
Good
For
night.
those of you here in Korea, good morning for those of you in the US, and good day or lunch or whatever for England and the rest of Europe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.